Assalamualaikum সবাইকে আশা করি সবাই ভালো আছেন Welcome to the series where I look at issues and problems from the past and I break them down so that we all can learn lessons from them and apply the lessons into our modern lives. I believe that every problem that we're facing today, may it be individualistic problems or societal problems, all of these problems have already been dealt in the past, but we still find it difficult to realize how to solve them in the present. And that's why, through these series, I want to bring out the lessons from the past and how people dealt with the problems or similar problems in the past and break them down so that all of us can benefit from it, learn to solve them in the present. As for this episode, this is a continuation of the last episode where I discussed about lessons from the time us humans start to evolve. So in this episode, I would like to focus on the second stage of human evolution. You can say I would like to focus on Homo habilis and Homo erectus and their lifestyle and how they dealt with survival, starvation, lifestyle as a whole. Alright, so to start this episode off, I would like you to imagine yourself in a time when language wasn't invented, a time before the cities were constructed, and a time before gods weren't an idea. Imagine the air is filled with thick dust, and your nervous system is always detecting danger. You're always suspecting when the next predator is gonna come out of. And then your skin's all toughened up by the coarse weather. I would like you to imagine yourself as one of the early humans during this time, the Homo erectus. Now, during this period, we weren't traveling alone anymore. We had our kin, a small band of scavengers, toolmakers, and hunters. Every sunrise was a chance to survive, and every nightfall was a test of courage. And keeping that in mind, imagine you're moving through the tall grass with a stone-tipped spear in your hand. And ahead, your leader signals you to duck and put up your guards. Through the grass, you spot an enormous animal. Let's say an auroch. Your leader signals to the group and he moves first. He risks his life in front of the animal. Because during this time, leadership wasn't shown through words, it was displayed through actions. Masculinity wasn't a title, but it was a responsibility that came naturally to the tribe leaders. And during this primitive time, leaders rose in power through their actions, through their ability to hunt and protect, and to serve the whole tribe as a whole. If you're new to this channel, hey everyone, my name's Awad Hassan, and on this channel, I look at history, not just to learn from the past, but to draw philosophies and lessons from the past so that we can become better human beings today. In this episode, we're diving deeper into the primitive world of early hominins, how man survived, hunted, led, and laid the foundation for what it means to be human in the world we know today. Alright, so let's start with the episode 2 of period 1. So we're diving into a period between 2.5 and 1 million years ago. And as you can see from the timeline right here, from 2.5 to 1 million years ago, there's a possible intersection in between, or closer to 1 million years ago. So you can assume that around that time, humans started to evolve and there might have been some crossbreeding between species and other hominids were seen during this time. So at this time, this period set the foundation for what we now recognize as masculinity, leadership, order, and most human behaviors. So this period is called the Lower Paleolithic era, and two species stood out during this time: the Homo habilis and the Homo erectus. So Homo habilis, also known as the handyman, were the first known toolmakers. Using simple stone flakes to scavenge meat, their intelligence wasn't brute; it was adaptive. They learned to manipulate their environment, and that made them unpredictable. And in the wild, unpredictability it was power. So you can technically say that humans or the human species started going from prey to predator during this time. All right, and the next species that we're going to look at was Homo erectus, also known as the upright man. So Homo erectus was taller, stronger, and sharper. They were the first to master fire, and fire didn't just cook food for them. It cooked fear, it gave them warmth, protection from predators, and something we often overlook. The counterpiece of community was formed around this time. As you can see, the life in bands, the original brotherhood was formed during this time, and specifically during in the Homo erectus species. But here's the catch: these weren't kingdoms. There were no thrones or temples. They had no civilizations, but they had one thing, which was structure. And structure, when born out of survival, was more honest than any institution. The species, they evolved into a more nomadic lifestyle with bands of 20 to 50 individuals, thinking of this as the original tribe model, not built on contracts, but reciprocity. So if you hunted, others protected your offspring, and if you provided meat, your place in the hierarchy was elevated. This was the emergence of the proto-social contracts. So now if we move to the next slide. And now we look at the developments during the Lower Paleolithic period. There were three major developments that you can see. One was the structure without civilization, gestures over words, which is communication, and the chaos and confusion during that time forced the species to discover or come into order or alignment. So the proto-social contract was something, it was communication before laws, before language. Basically, actions and consequences were used to determine signals and gestures. So it was something like, if I risk my life for the hunt, you ensure my word isn't forgotten. Communication was nonverbal, so language of gestures was used, facial cues, postures, and proximity. This was the foundation of what we now call social signaling, and instinct still active today. So when a man walks tall, eyes steady, with a calm voice, you automatically think he's evolutionarily more superior or more confident. So even without words, they built systems of loyalty, obligation, and contribution. These ancient people, they weren't just surviving; they were organizing themselves for the next species about to come, which was Homo sapiens. And from that organization came the first signs of masculinity. Dominance wasn't prevalent, but responsibility was, and coordination was more important over the thought of controlling others, controlling other tribes. All right, so now let's look at an analysis of the Lower Paleolithic era and the lifestyle of our ancestors during this time. So, in this primitive world, there were no speeches, there were no resumes, no performance reviews or whatsoever. Respect wasn't granted because a man said he was strong or just displayed it. It was earned through action, risk, and selflessness. It was earned through a philosophical term called the code of respect, where someone would have to jump through hoops and basically show to the other group members why they required the respect and why they were a good leader than the others. Moving on, there were three traits that were noticeable during this period. The first one was that hunting wasn't just about putting food on the ground, it was a trial by fire. So each hunt came with real tangible risk. So there was possibilities of death by predators, injury from the terrains, days without food. But the reward wasn't only meat, it was status. Today's status is earned more through influence and power and also money. So status was earned during that time, and it's still prevalent till today. And it was not something that you just claimed out of nowhere. This was because a man who risked the most for the tribe became the one they depended on the most. And in the evolutionary psychology, this is called the costly signaling theory. The idea that true leadership requires you to take on high cost, high risk tasks that prove your value without saying a word. And in a world without laws, without titles, that kind of reputation kind of became everything, because trust was everything, and just by showing strength, it wasn't enough, especially in a world where currency was not a thing yet. So how did you build trust during this time? Well, it wasn't built with your fists, not with your voices, but by doing the hard thing for the group. So the best men didn't just survive, they served. They risked their lives at the forefront of the hunt, like they were right in front, ready to be sacrificed. They shared their food first, even when they were starving.
And men during this time, they lit the fire last, so ensuring others were warm and safe before themselves. So this wasn't mindless brute masculinity, but this was what I like to call strategic masculinity or strategic leadership. It was focused, deliberate, it was restrained with purpose. And masculinity during this time was rooted in service and not ego. Today, most people tend to confuse the term masculinity with having a high ego or like being more aggressive or like just being loud in general. But that isn't the case. So we often think masculinity was about domination, but in these tribes, it was about dependability. So if you are a dependable person, more people depend on you. They see you as a competent figure. That's when you were deemed as being masculine. It wasn't about shouting orders, it was about who was willing to bleed for the group. So, in psychological terms, this embodies altruistic leadership, which is prioritizing others' well being above your own, and competence hierarchy, status based on value delivered, not force applied, and deferred gratification, delaying personal comfort for the benefit of others. That was the primitive code, and I believe it still holds to this day. So, on this slide, we can see that what are some aspects from this time that still hold true to the world, the modern world today. And it's firstly, it's real respect still comes from action. So, respect is an exchange. You provide something to society, and in return, society respects you. That's how it's been going on for all these years. Leadership was basically how you serve the world. So you have to serve a purpose to the world to be deemed as a good leader. And then again, masculinity was equal to dependability, not like today where it's equal to ego. All right, so the number one reason why I personally chose to start with this period was to analyze the differences and similarities between our psychological behaviors in the past and our psychological behaviors in the modern day. And what I found was that the behaviors for responsibility and survival during these early stages of human evolution are still prevalent in the modern day. And so I'll be explaining this with using four frameworks that still exist today and that existed about 2.4 billion years ago. So for each of the four frameworks, I'll be explaining what the framework is. I'll be giving a definition for the framework, and then I'll be discussing examples from the past and examples from the present world today. After that, I'll be talking about the philosophical tie-in related to the framework and how different philosophers throughout time tried to explain each of these responsibilities using their respective philosophies. So, the first framework that I'm looking at is called dominance hierarchies. So, a definition for this framework would be it's a natural system where individuals are ranked based on their ability to contribute, protect, or lead. Unlike tyranny, which is earned influence, but it's not enforced control. A lot of governments in the world today try to like force people in control, try to like even in families, like the earning member or the dominant member tries to exert control over the other members in the family. But that's not the correct way to go about it. There was a tribe mentality. So an example from the past would be like if you didn't get status by boasting, but you earned your place through contribution. The man who hunted and protected, he led not because he shouted the loudest, but because others chose to follow. And if we looked at a modern parallel, so this is the tribe mentality. The modern parallel would be here. So this is a picture of a firefighter. And I want you to think of a firefighter running into danger or a team leader who takes responsibility when things go wrong. So these are the functional dominance hierarchies today, where the competent rise because others trust them. Now, if I were to look at a philosophical tie-in with this virtue or trait or framework, however you want to say it, it would be Plato's philosopher king concept that implies that leadership is earned through virtue and wisdom, and it's not just a title. So Plato also goes to explain that masculinity, even in the past, was built on meritocracy. Second framework that I would like to discuss here would be reciprocal altruism. So what is actually reciprocal altruism? So it's actually a strategy where one individual provides help to the another with the expectation, but without entitlement, that help will be returned in the future. It fosters trust and social bonds. So it's like almost like giving food to someone and then earning their trust. But let's take a look at it in the past. So during the Paleolithic period, giving away a portion of meat wasn't just weakness, it was a kind of investment. You created a debt, a bond, and a tie. And in a world where you might be injured tomorrow, that bond could be the difference between life and death. Say you were in a tribe and you come across this other tribe in the forest or in the wild, and then what would be your mode of communication during that time? It would be to share food, it would be to share resources. That's how you would share stories about your past life with theirs. And that's how trust between the two tribes would be formed. Now, if we looked at a modern day perspective, it would be resourceful men in our period. So a man who helps his friend move, expecting nothing, but knowing that when the day comes, that energy will circle back to him. That's the most clarified example in the modern day. Now, what would be a philosophical tie-in with this feature or trait or framework from this time? Well, Nietzsche's idea of the noble man, well, it's who gives because he chooses to, not because he's forced to. So, a responsible man, giving is not submissive, it's strategic generosity. I'd like to move on to the third framework that I would like to call delayed gratification. Most of you might already heard of this term, but let's break it down further. So, what is actually delayed gratification? The ability to resist an immediate reward in order to gain a more valuable long-term benefit. So it's a cornerstone of self-discipline, maturity, and strategic thinking. So I'd like to say it's the core of discipline and leadership, basically. And from the diagram, you can tell that it's linked to time. So it also has to do with self-control and patience. Patience targeted towards hitting a specific goal. For example, in the Muslim world, the period of Ramadan, Muslims fast in order to attain a more divine spiritual blessing or spiritual awareness. Now, you could say that that is a very good example for delayed gratification that has lasted for a very long time. But let's break it down from the past. So, during the Paleolithic period, men had to track animals for hours, wait silently, stalk their prey, endure hunger, all for a chance at a meaningful kill. But discipline wasn't noble, it was necessary during that time. So, if you broke early, you missed the prey. And if you quit, you starve. If a more general modern day parallel would be a man who studies, works, invests, not for instant pleasure, but for long term success. So, if you're going to the gym, you're an entrepreneur, or if you're a father who works two jobs for his family, you clearly hit this delayed gratification feature. A philosophical tie in for delayed gratification would be Stoic endurance, a philosophy put forward by the remarkable Marcus Aurelius. So Stoicism, especially in the writings of Marcus Aurelius, preaches control over impulse, not because life was easy, but because endurance would create order. It would bring in a sense of calmness and more productivity into your life. Moving on to the last framework, I'd like to list it as calculated risk taking. So what is actually calculated risk taking? So it is taking action where the potential reward outweighs the cost, but only after strategic evaluation. So it's not just risk taking from recklessness, it's measured bravery. This in the tribe. So in a tribe, this would apply to hunters. So running at a mammoth with a spear could be deemed as suicidal, unless you had position, numbers, timing. So the strongest men weren't dumb, they were very precise. They took risks that others feared, but only when necessary and would bring about some benefits to them. Let's look at the modern day parallel for this framework from the past. So the modern man who moves to another country to start over a new life, to bring in growth for his family, and the leader who makes a hard call when everyone else is silent. For example, just think of it in an office environment, right? These are the modern day frameworks from this past example. Now, what would be a philosophical tie-in? So, if you've played Assassin's Creed, you might be familiar with this term, the leap of faith. And I might make a more detailed explanation of why that leap of faith was associated with assassins. So, Kierkegaard spoke of the leap of faith, which is a decision into the unknown, but with purpose. So, responsibility has and accountability has also lived on the edge of order and chaos, but never without reason. That would be all for this video. And ending this video, this episode, I would like you to take as much value away from this as possible. So, in the end, as a conclusion, I would like to give you some practical advice from whatever I've discussed so that you can start applying these philosophies and points into your daily lives. I want you to start by showing up for your family, for your craft, for your purpose, even when it feels like no one else is clapping for you. Especially then, when responsibility and accountability begin, in the quiet moment, when you choose responsibility over comfort. The second thing I want you to do is give more than you take, not to be applauded, but to build trust amongst individuals, to build bonds in communities. The kind of trust your tribe, your people can lean on when the pressure's high. I want you to lead through action and not words. Let your behavior speak so loudly that no one needs to ask what you believe in. Because leadership isn't declared, it's recognized by people. And when the moment comes to risk something, don't risk to impress others or for your own selfish gains. Risk with purpose. Risk for something greater than yourself, for your family, your mission, your name. In the primitive world, responsibility and accountability They weren't performances, they were duties, a daily act of provision and protection. And despite all the technology, the noise, the false metrics, that essence has changed. And through these videos and this series, I want to bring back all these traits so that you can implement them in your lives and be a respectful masculine man or individual. And lastly, you don't have to be loud, but you do have to be a solid person and seen not by everyone, but by those who count on you. So today, closing this chapter, these are the few things that I want you to be. I want you to be intentional with your time. I want you to be strong in your silence and be of service to something worthy, something greater than yourself. With that, I end this episode. And next time, on episode 3, we dive into the art of battle and the sacred bond of brotherhood that shaped the early archetypes. Because strength without brotherhood is a weapon with no aim. Until then, I want you to walk with your chest pumped, and I want you to walk with weight.